The front door creaked open, and Mark Stevens froze in the entryway. The sound of laughter, children's laughter, echoed from somewhere inside his usually quiet home. But that wasn't what stopped him cold. His house, the chaotic mess he'd left this morning, was spotless. Toys organized, floors gleaming, dishes that had piled for days now neatly stacked in cabinets. And there, in his kitchen, stood his boss, Barbara, on her hands and knees scrubbing his floor while his 7-year-old daughter Emma giggled beside her. If you're wondering how a single father's boss ended up cleaning his house and why this moment would break him completely, stay with me. This story might just change how you see the world around you. If it touches your heart, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories that remind us of the unexpected kindness that exists in this world. Mark hadn't always been a single dad. 3 years ago, his life had been different, complete. He and Sarah had been married for 8 wonderful years. Their daughter Emma was the center of their universe, and their modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs was always filled with laughter and love. Sarah had been the organized one, the one who kept their home running smoothly while Mark worked as a project manager at a local construction company. Then came the diagnosis. Aggressive. Terminal. 6 months, the doctors said. Sarah lasted 8, fighting until her last breath. When she passed, she took a part of Mark with her, leaving him alone to raise their daughter and navigate a world that suddenly seemed impossibly large and empty. The first year after Sarah's death passed in a blur of grief. Mark moved through his days like a ghost, going through the motions for Emma's sake. He'd drop her off at school, go to work, pick her up, make dinner, usually something simple and often unhealthy, help with homework, and put her to bed. Then he'd sit alone in the living room, surrounded by the growing chaos of their home, too exhausted and heartbroken to care about the dishes in the sink or the laundry piling up. Barbara Reynolds had been Mark's boss for 5 years. A stern woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair always pulled back in a tight bun, she had a reputation for being demanding but fair. Mark had always respected her, but they'd never been close. After Sarah died, Barbara had given him time off and arranged for flexible hours, but their relationship remained strictly professional. Until Emma's school called one day. Mark had been in an important client meeting when his phone buzzed with the school's number. Barbara had noticed his distraction and, seeing the caller ID, had nodded for him to take it. Emma had a fever of 102, and the school nurse needed someone to pick her up immediately. Mark had looked at Barbara with panic in his eyes. The Henderson project, he'd started. Go, Barbara had said firmly. Family first. Always. That evening, as Mark sat beside Emma's bed, placing cool cloths on her forehead and worrying about the presentation he was supposed to be preparing, his doorbell rang. When he opened it, Barbara stood there with a folder of documents and a container of homemade chicken soup. My mother's recipe, she'd said, pushing past him into the house. Best thing for a fever. Now, where's your laptop? We've got work to do. They'd worked side by side at Mark's kitchen table until midnight, finishing the presentation while periodically checking on Emma. It was the first time Mark had really talked to Barbara about something other than work. He learned she'd raised 2 children on her own after her husband left when they were toddlers. Both were now in college. It gets easier, she'd told him as she was leaving. Not better, necessarily. Sarah will always be missing. But the living gets easier. That night marked a shift in their relationship. Barbara became more than a boss, she became a mentor of sorts, someone who understood the unique challenges of single parenthood. She'd occasionally ask about Emma, offer practical advice about school issues, or recommend activities that had worked for her kids. But Mark never expected to come home and find her cleaning his house. The day it happened started like any other. Mark had dropped Emma at school, promising to pick her up from her friend Lily's house after their playdate. Work had been chaotic, a supplier had backed out of a major project, and Mark had spent the day scrambling to find alternatives. By the time he left the office, his head was pounding, and all he wanted was to collapse on the couch with a beer. He'd texted Lily's mom, asking if Emma could stay a bit longer, but she'd replied that she needed to take Lily to a doctor's appointment. Resigned to no downtime, Mark had driven to pick up his daughter, mentally cataloging the mess waiting at home, breakfast dishes still in the sink, laundry unfolded on the couch, toys scattered across the living room floor. He'd meant to clean over the weekend, but Emma had a soccer game, and then they'd visited Sarah's parents, and somehow Monday had arrived with the house still in disarray. When he pulled into Lily's driveway, Emma wasn't waiting outside as usual. He knocked, and Lily's mom answered with a confused expression. "Emma left hours ago," she said. "Your boss picked her up. She showed me her ID and said you'd asked her to get Emma because you were stuck in a meeting. She had Emma's emergency contact card." Mark's heart had nearly stopped. Barbara had indeed been listed as an emergency contact, something they'd arranged during a particularly hectic period at work, but he hadn't asked her to pick up Emma today. He'd called Barbara immediately, his hands shaking as he dialed. "She's fine," Barbara had assured him before he could even form a coherent question. "We're at your house. Emma was telling me yesterday how she wanted to surprise you by cleaning up, so we're doing just that. Come home when you can." The relief had been so overwhelming that Mark had to sit in his car for several minutes before he could drive. And now, standing in his doorway, looking at his transformed home and his daughter's beaming face, something inside him finally broke. It wasn't sadness that overwhelmed him. It was gratitude. For the first time since Sarah died, Mark felt like he wasn't completely alone in this impossible task of raising their daughter. "Daddy!" Emma squealed, running to him. "We surprised you. Ms. Barbara showed me how to fold towels like they do in hotels, and we made lasagna, and I helped." Mark lifted his daughter, holding her tightly as he met Barbara's eyes over Emma's shoulder. The older woman stood up, wiping her hands on a dish towel, looking slightly embarrassed. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "Emma mentioned yesterday that you've been too tired to clean lately, and I remember those days all too well. Sometimes you just need a reset." Mark set Emma down and, to Barbara's evident surprise, hugged her. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what this means." Barbara patted his back awkwardly. "It's nothing. Really. When Tom left me with the kids, my sister did the same for me once. Just paying it forward." That evening, the three of them ate lasagna at a clean kitchen table. Emma chattered excitedly about school and her friends, while Barbara shared stories about raising her own children. For the first time in 3 years, the house felt warm again, filled with conversation and laughter. After Emma went to bed, Mark and Barbara sat in the living room with cups of coffee. "I've been failing her," Mark admitted quietly. "Sarah would be so disappointed in me. The house, the frozen dinners, the way I'm always tired and distracted." Barbara shook her head firmly. "That's not failure, Mark. That's grief. That's being human. Sarah wouldn't be disappointed, she'd be proud of how you've kept going, how much you love that little girl." "I don't know how to do this," he confessed. "Every day, I feel like I'm just barely keeping my head above water." "Nobody does," Barbara replied. "Not really. We all just figure it out as we go. But you don't have to figure it out alone." Over the following months, Barbara became a regular presence in their lives. Not in a romantic way, their relationship remained one of friendship and mutual respect, but as family of choice. She'd come over for Sunday dinners, help Emma with her science projects, and occasionally step in when work emergencies collided with school events. Mark, in turn, began to emerge from his grief. He started taking better care of himself and the house. He joined a support group for single parents and made friends with other dads navigating similar challenges. He even began dating occasionally, though cautiously and with Emma's feelings always at the forefront. 3 years later, on the anniversary of that day Barbara had cleaned his house, Mark invited her over for a special dinner. Emma, now 10, had helped him cook and set the table with their best dishes. "We have something for you," Mark said after dessert, nodding to Emma, who ran to get a wrapped package. Barbara opened it to find a framed photo of the three of them at Emma's soccer championship, along with a handwritten card from Emma that read, "To our favorite BOOS, best official occasional substitute, Mom." "When you showed up that day," Mark said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "you didn't just clean our house. You helped us start living again. You showed me that family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up when you need them most." Barbara, usually so composed, wiped tears from her eyes. "You two did all the hard work," she said. "I just provided a little push." Emma shook her head firmly, in a gesture so reminiscent of Barbara that Mark had to smile. "No," his daughter said with the certainty only children possess. "You showed us that it's okay to need help sometimes. And that's the most important lesson ever." As the three of them sat together, Mark reflected on the journey they'd taken. The path of grief is never straight, and healing doesn't mean forgetting. Sarah would always be the love of his life, the mother of his child, an irreplaceable absence. But he had learned that new connections could form in the spaces left behind, different but valuable in their own way. Sometimes the family you need isn't the one you were born into or even the one you married into, it's the one that forms around you when you're broken, the people who step in not because they have to, but because they choose to. Barbara had chosen them, and in doing so, had taught Mark that he wasn't failing as a single parent, he was simply learning how to be one. The truth that broke Mark that day wasn't a devastating revelation but a healing one, that he didn't have to carry his burden alone. That asking for help, or accepting it when offered, wasn't weakness but strength. That family could be found in the most unexpected places, even in a boss willing to get down on her hands and knees to scrub your kitchen floor. And that, perhaps, is the most important truth of all, that love and support can come from unexpected sources, appearing just when we need them most. All we have to do is open the door and let them in. If this story touched your heart, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Remember that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness come from the most unexpected people in our lives, and that none of us has to face our challenges alone. There are BOOS all around us, we just need the courage to let them help. The years continued to pass, each bringing new challenges and triumphs for Mark and Emma. By the time Emma reached high school, their little family had expanded in ways Mark never could have imagined that day he stood shocked in his doorway. Barbara remained a constant, attending Emma's band concerts and soccer games with the same dedication as any grandmother. She'd retired from the construction company but still consulted occasionally, mostly to stay busy. Her Sunday dinners at Mark's house became a tradition neither would consider breaking. Emma blossomed into a confident teenager who inherited her mother's compassion and her father's determination. She kept Sarah's memory alive through small rituals, wearing her mother's necklace on special occasions, maintaining a small garden of Sarah's favorite flowers, and talking about her openly, ensuring she remained a presence in their home rather than a painful absence. Mark eventually found love again with Diane, a kindergarten teacher he met at a school fundraiser. Their relationship developed slowly and carefully, with Emma's feelings considered at every step. When he finally proposed, it was with Emma's blessing and Barbara's enthusiastic support. Diane never tried to replace Sarah, she understood that wasn't possible or necessary. Instead, she created her own place in their family, bringing her warmth and patience into their lives. On Emma's 18th birthday, Mark found himself sitting on the back porch with Barbara, watching as Emma laughed with friends around a bonfire in the yard. Diane was inside, putting the finishing touches on a cake decorated with Emma's college colors. "Did I ever thank you properly?" Mark asked quietly. "For that day?" Barbara smiled, the lines around her eyes crinkling. "About 1,000 times, yes." "Well, here's 1001. I don't know where we'd be if you hadn't shown up that day." "You'd have figured it out," Barbara said with certainty. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." "Maybe," Mark conceded. "But I'm glad I didn't have to find out." As Emma prepared to leave for college that fall, she spent an afternoon going through boxes of her mother's things with Mark. They'd done this periodically over the years, each time finding themselves able to share more memories with less pain. "I found this," Emma said, pulling out a letter in an envelope with her name written in Sarah's handwriting. It was in her jewelry box. Mark recognized it immediately. Sarah had written letters to Emma during her final months, for birthdays, graduation, her wedding day, and trusting Mark to give them to their daughter at the right times. "This one says, when you're ready to leave home," Emma explained, her voice steady though her eyes shimmered with tears. "I think it's time." Mark nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Emma opened the envelope carefully and began to read aloud. "My dearest Emma. If you're reading this, you're standing on the threshold of a new adventure, preparing to leave the nest and fly on your own. I wish more than anything that I could be there to help you pack, to give you one last hug before you go, to embarrass you thoroughly in front of your new roommate. Since I can't, I want to leave you with this thought: home isn't just the place where you grew up. Home is the feeling you carry inside you, built from love and memories and the knowledge that you belong somewhere, to someone. Your father and I created that home for you, and no matter how far you travel, it will always exist. I hope by now your father has found some happiness again. He deserves it, and so do you. Know that I would want this for both of you, not a life spent in mourning, but one filled with joy and new connections. Any love that comes into your lives doesn't diminish what we shared, it honors it. Be brave, my sweet girl. Be kind. Remember where you come from, but don't be afraid to discover who you might become. I am so proud of the person you are, and the woman you will be. All my love, always. Mom." When Emma finished reading, she looked up at her father with tears streaming down her face. She knew, didn't she? That we'd be okay. Mark nodded, his own vision blurred. Your mother was the wisest person I've ever known. That evening, as their extended family gathered for Emma's going-away dinner, Barbara, Diane, Sarah's parents, and several close friends who had supported them through the years, Mark found himself overwhelmed with gratitude. The journey from that broken man standing in his doorway to the person he was now hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been setbacks and dark days, moments when grief had threatened to pull him under again. But each time, someone had been there to help him back to his feet, Barbara with her practical wisdom, Emma with her resilient spirit, Diane with her patient love, and always, the memory of Sarah guiding them forward. As he looked around the table at the unlikely family they had built, Mark realized that the greatest lesson of his life had come from his greatest loss, that love doesn't diminish when shared, it multiplies. That family isn't defined by blood or obligation but by choice and commitment. That healing doesn't mean forgetting but finding a way to carry your scars with grace. And that sometimes, the most profound act of love is simply showing up, whether it's a boss on her hands and knees cleaning your floor, a daughter brave enough to keep her mother's memory alive, or a man willing to open his broken heart to the possibility of joy again. Years later, when Emma called to announce she was expecting her first child, Mark found himself thinking of that pivotal day. How a simple act of kindness had created ripples that continued to spread outward, touching all their lives in ways none of them could have imagined. When Emma's daughter was born, they named her Sarah Barbara, a tribute to the two women who had shaped their family in profound ways. And as Mark held his granddaughter for the first time, with Barbara beaming proudly beside him and Diane squeezing his shoulder, he understood that this was Sarah's legacy, not the grief of her absence, but the love that had flourished in its wake. The broken man who had stood in that doorway years ago could never have imagined this moment. But perhaps Sarah had. Perhaps she had known all along that love finds a way to persist, to transform, to heal, even when it seems impossible. And in that knowledge lies the true heart of this story, that our greatest breakings can lead to our most beautiful rebuildings, if only we have the courage to let others help us gather the pieces.